Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. In this session, we will work on the automation with Python, where we will read a spreadsheet using Python library. So watch this video properly because it will test your previous learning. And don't forget to subscribe our channel. So let's start the today's session. So basically, I have just cleaned up my Python project. We have this main.py which is empty, and we are going to write an application that will read a spreadsheet file from our local file system. It will read some information from that spreadsheet file and do something with that data, and this would be very useful use case. If you are working with lots of files and you want to do some data processing in those files, and you don't want to do that manually by automating or writing a program in Python that basically can do anything in a file or across multiple files. So let's see exactly what we are going to be doing with this program. So first of all, we are going to have an input file, a spreadsheet file that we are going to be working with, and that spreadsheet will look like this. It's called inventory. That's how it's going to look like. So basically, this file simulates something that many companies would have and employees of that company would be working with. So we have this list of product numbers, inventory for each product price for the product, and a supplier. So this could be an example file from a company that is dealing with selling or buying products. So what we are going to do is we are going to read the information from this file, and we are going to do something with that information. First, we are going to write logic that calculates how many products we have per supplier. So we have 3 supplier companies here, and per supplier we are going to calculate number of products from that specific company, and as a result we are going to list the company. So all 3 companies with their respective number of products. Then we are going to write another logic that lists inventory products that have inventory which is less than 10. So basically those ones. The third exercise is going to be to list each company with their respective total inventory value, and finally in the last exercise we will calculate the inventory value for each product. So product count times price, and we are going to write that value to an additional column in the spreadsheet, and after that we are going to save that updated spreadsheet file programmatically using Python. So we are going to see how to update a file and then save it programmatically in Python. If any of these sounds a little bit too complicated for you, then just bear with me. I am going to explain everything step by step, and it's going to become much clearer when we actually start writing the logic. So the first thing what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this file that I have in the downloads folder, and I'm actually gonna move that into my project. So I'm gonna copy that and I'm gonna drop it in here so that we have the file right in our project, and so we can basically just read it easily. And here is our inventory file. So that's taken care of. So obviously what we want to do now is read that file. So let our Python program read the contents of that file right here, because we want to write some logic based on the values that are in this inventory file, right? We want to calculate stuff, we want to list some stuff, and so on. So generally we want to work with these values, and in order to do that we need to read all of these values into our program so that we have them available. So how do we do that? Now there is actually a built-in module in Python that allows you to work with files. Generally, it's not specific for a spreadsheet or for any other file. It's for different types of files generally. However, there is an external package that allows you to work with spreadsheets specifically. And the obvious advantage is that that external module that allows you to work with spreadsheets, or was created to work with spreadsheets specifically, has much more functions and is much easier to use. If you are working with spreadsheets compared to this built-in file module, so that's one of the cases where you may have multiple ways of actually implementing some functionality for application, and then you have to make this decision of maybe finding a better package or better module which is available externally that will make it easier for you to implement that functionality. So that's what we are going to do for our project. We are going to choose the package that is actually made for working with spreadsheets. We are going to use that one, and it's called OpenPyXL. And if I search for it, this is the package that we are looking for. And if I click inside, basically we have some information about this package. So here we see our description. Let's actually make this bigger. Description library to read write Excel files with all these formats. So this is the library that we are going to be using in the same way as we did before. We are going to copy that command and execute it from PyCharm's integrated terminal. So from here I'm gonna execute this pip command and install our module, and as you see, successfully installed OpenPyXL, and this is the version of the module that we installed. And in external libraries, side packages, you should be able to see our OpenPyXL package. And now, because the package is available locally, I can do import and open PyXL again. I get a suggestion from PyCharm because the module is there, and now we are able to use that package for our application. And one small note here, if you're wondering why there are some packages with a dot inside and some without, these are the packages that we install Python packages. And we know that because there's this init Python file inside, and the ones without the dot, they are just folders with bunch of files inside, but they are not Python packages. So to say, and inside some of those packages, we see other packages as well with their own init file. So hierarchy of multiple packages, and at this point I am going to say that the word library describes package that includes multiple other packages. So basically, which has a hierarchy of packages. So we have module, which is just one Python file that we can use in our project. Then we have package, which is a hierarchy of multiple modules with an init Python file inside. And then we have library, which is basically multiple packages together in a hierarchy, just like we see right here. So note the difference so you don't get confused when you see library package and module, especially it used interchangeably. Great. So now we have our module in place. So let's use it now to read our spreadsheet file. And again, you basically have to know the function names to do that. If you don't, you can do dot and get suggestions. And load workbook is actually the function that we need in order to read our spreadsheet file. So I'm going to choose this function, and obviously we need to tell this function which file it should read. So as a parameter, we are going to say please load inventory file, and we even get a suggestion because we have this inventory file here, and there you go. Now this function will load the workbook and all its content, and later we obviously want to do something with that content. So in order to be able to do that, we need to save it first as a variable, and let's actually call it inventory file like this, and this will give us the file contents. Now let's actually open that file again, and let's see exactly what we need so we can have multiple such sheets basically per file. So we need to tell the program which one it should use exactly. So for example, if this was called a product list, you would use that name, but we're going to go with sheet 1. So we're going to use that name, and we're going to grab that using following syntax. And you remember this syntax probably from using a dictionary. So this will give us this one specific sheet, and all the information inside, and we can also save that into a variable. So let's actually call that product list. So now we have read the whole file, then we have read this specific sheet of that file, and now we have all this information in that variable. So now we can read any of those values and do calculations, etc. using that variable. So let's get to our first task, and the first task is to calculate how many products we have per supplier, and then list the names of the suppliers with that respective number of products. So let's go back and do that. So the results, what we want to get is basically products, a number of products per supplier. That's what we want to get as a result. So we are going to create that variable, and we are going to set it to an empty dictionary. So by the end, our program should give us something like this: a dictionary where the name of the company is the key and the value is basically product count for that company. And since we have three suppliers or three companies, we are gonna end up with a dictionary with three key values pairs per company. So we are starting with an empty dictionary for products per supplier. And now let's see how we can programmatically calculate this. First of all, what we need is we need to go through each of these lines. So we have these rows, so we need to go through each and every row in order, in sequence, and we need to get or check a supplier name for that row. And you remember, whenever we execute a logic on multiple values over and over again, so basically same logic or same function gets executed for multiple different values for number of times. That's basically a use case for a loop. So we are looping through those rows, and we are doing the same thing per row, which is getting the name of the supplier. Now, as you also remember, loops have conditions, right? We need to tell the loop how many times it should execute that specific logic. And if we check our file here, how many times we want to execute the logic, the answer is as many times as the number of products. So if we scroll down, we have 74 products. So we need to do that 74 times for each product. So basically as many times as the number of product, and obviously we want this program to work for any spreadsheet file, right, with any number of products. So we need to calculate, or we need to read that value also from the file. So we need to read how many products are on this list. So let's see how we can do that. First of all, we are using for loop to execute the logic for specific number of times. And if you remember from for loop syntax, for Then we have the specific item. So what's in an item? In our case, our item is a row. Right product row is going to be an item of iteration. So looping basically, so we can call our item products row and then comes in, and now we need that condition how many times, and again they should be generic. So we need to calculate, or we need to read the number of lines here, number of rows here from the file, and the way we can read, that is, remember, we have all the information we need in that one specific variable, which is product list, and that variable has the value for number of rows, which is called max row. Now, how do I know that max row attribute is available for product list? I basically just looked it up on the documentation of the module, and as I previously also mentioned, whenever you are using a module, this module will have a documentation. So if you need some functionality, if you need some values, you can basically just search inside the documentation which function and variables are available to get the functionality or values that you need. And we can actually test it. We can print it out like this, and as you see here, 75. So basically, max row will always give us the number of lines or number of rows in that specific sheet. So we know how many times to iterate. Now, whenever we are providing a specific number in a for loop like 75, for example, in this case, we need to put that number in a range like this. So we can't just say 70, or in this case, max row. Now, why do we need a range here? And why is number just not enough? Because the for loop is for iterating over a list, and the range will create a list of numbers to iterate through. In our case, the range of 75 will create a list of numbers, a sequence of numbers from 0 to 74. And with that, we are going to have a valid for loop where for each item in this list of numbers, some logic will be executed. So that's why we need a range here. And now there's one more thing that we need to fix. We go back to our spreadsheet. You see that the first row, so this is going to be the first row, generally does not actually include the product information. It just includes the titles for each column. So we actually do not want to read this line. We want to skip it, and we want to start from the second row. So instead of starting for loop from the first row, we want to start it from the second row. And in order to tell Python to start at row 2 in the range function, we are going to pass first parameter 2. So basically, this will give us a new range of numbers starting from 2 instead of starting from 0. And since we are using those numbers in the range as an inbox for the rows, the first number is going to be 2. So we are going to start iterating from the second row. So this will be the start point and this will be the end point. So generally from here to the end. Now there are two things specific to a range that you should be aware of. First of all, when we do not provide the start index, the start number in the range by default, it's actually 0. So it's not 1, but it's 0. And obviously, we don't have a line 0 here. So if we executed it with the default one, we would get an error. So that's one thing to consider, that range actually by default start at 0 and not 1. But for us, it doesn't matter because we are skipping the first one anyways. And we are starting from line 2 because our spreadsheet doesn't have line 0 obviously. Another specific of the range is that the second value here is the last number of execution in the loop in our case. This is going to be 75 because we have 75 lines and we printed that out here. That number is actually exclusive. It's not inclusive. That means that the range will execute from line 2 to 75 exclusive. So basically till here, this line will not be included in the loop. Again, that's a specification of the range which we need to fix, and want to tell you what we want, that iteration including the last number as well, including that max row, and a simple fix for that is going to be to do +1 here. So whatever the max row is, we want to include that 1 as well. So we want to add 1 to it. Now we have a range starting from 2 and ending in 76 exclusives. So obviously the 76th line will not be read, and this will now give us a range that we need. And now that we have condition for the loop and we have set how many times it should execute, let's actually execute the logic itself. So what is the first information we need from that product row? For each row, we generally need the supplier name so that we can increment or start counting how many products this supplier has. So we need this 1, 2, 3, fourth column, and the value in that fourth column for each and every row. Let's go back to editor. How do we get a value in the cell? You have to imagine when we iterate, we have one row per iteration. So right here, we actually have this product row, which is just one row, and we have 4 columns here, and we want value in this specific cell, and we can get it using first of all product list, because again we have all the information here. So in this list, we need a cell. We need a value of a cell. So that's the name of the function. And the cell takes two parameters. Again, product list contains the whole sheet here. So the whole list with all the rows and columns, and we can get a specific cell value. So whatever we are doesn't really matter from that variable by providing two values, the row number and the column number. That's it. So row 9 column 1 will be this specific value. Row 5 column 4 will be this specific value. So for each iteration, we are going to do exactly that. So for our case, the supplier is always column 4 and the row is dynamic because we are iterating, and therefore we are going to use whatever row we are at the current iteration. So that's the first parameter in column 4, as I said, and this will give us the supplier name for each and every row. So we can grab that value like this, and this is going to be supplier name. So we can save it in a variable. As a next step, we are going to start building how many products each supplier has. We are going to start building a dictionary with the name of the supplier and then how many products they have. So we are going to be building this dictionary here, and this is a reminder now for what I said previously, that you don't need knowledge of math in programming. Rather, you need logical thinking. So you're going to get tasks like this where you have to decide logically that how you're going to do a certain task and think it through. So programming is more about logic rather than pure calculation or math, which is actually more interesting and cooler. And that's exactly what we are going to need in this example. We are going to need some logical thinking to build this application. So bear with me. On this one, the first thing we need to check here. So think about this iteration on the first time and second time. The first time the list or the dictionary is actually empty. So we want to add the first supplier to the list right away. So we are going to grab that, and the syntax for adding a new entry in a dictionary is like this, where we have a key and a value here. So what we want to end up with the supplier name like a company and number of products for that supplier. That's the dictionary that we want to end up with. Then it's going to be as company and so on. So the very first supplier goes directly into the list, and we are going to need the name of that supplier. We don't know what it's going to be, so name as a key, and value is going to be 1 at the beginning, right? This is the very first iteration. So after the first its iteration, we're going to have the first company name, supplier name, and count 1 for that on the second loop. Second iteration, if the next line is a different supplier, like here, for example, then a new entry will be added because we have a new key now with count 1 right. So now we are going to have company as with one product company and with one product. Now what happens when on the next iteration we get company S again. What we want to happen is company S, the product count to increase to 2, right? Because now we found another product that is supplied by the same company. However, with this line, we are actually overriding and setting it back to 1. So, how do we make sure that number of products gets incremented instead of always setting it to 1? What we are going to do is, before we execute this line, we are going to check it a new supplier or an existing one, because that makes a difference. So, how do we know if it's a new one or an existing one? We can look that name up in the dictionary. If we have already edited that name in the dictionary, then it's going to be there, and we can do that very easily again with the syntax. If supplier name in the dictionary, it's actually very readable syntax that says, is the supplier already added to the list or is it a new one? So if this is true, again remember, if conditional. So if this is true statement, if the supplier's name is already there, then it is an existing one. So we need to increment the product number instead of setting it to 1. So instead of assigning a new value, we want to grab that value, the existing one, and basically add 1 to it, just increment by 1. So getting a value from a dictionary, you probably remember the syntax already using the key, and we can save it into a variable. Let's call it current number of products, like this. Remember, we are using a key in order to get the value, and the key is the supplier name, value is the product count. So this will give us the current number of products on the first iteration. This will be 1, or after the first iteration, we are going to have 1 product for that specific supplier, and if we already have that supplier in the dictionary, we want to increment the number of products for that specific supplier by 1, because we just found another product from that supplier. So we want this value to now be plus 1. So current number of products plus 1. So that's the new value that we want for the existing, for this current supplier. And how do we assign it back to the dictionary? Again, we grab that and assign it. So as you see, taking the values from the dictionary has the same syntax as setting that value in the dictionary. In fact, we could actually use a shortcut here. So instead of current num products, we could just take that value and add plus to it, and then set it back as a new value, and this will generally just give us a one liner. For the logic, depends on the taste whether this looks nice or not, or whether it's better to have a new variable and increment the value like this. Let's actually leave it like this. So this logic will take care of adding a product count every time we found another product for the same supplier. However, now we have to decide what happens when it's a new supplier. So if this condition is false, if the supplier name is not on the list, and this is going to be the case on the very first iteration as well, because the dictionary is basically empty. So there are no supplier names, and for that case, else we are going to do what we had before, which is just setting that number to 1. This is going to be the first value. So this will do two things. It will create a new entry in the dictionary for this new supplier, and it will set the product count number to 1 for that new supplier, and that's it. That's actually our logic, and let's actually try this out and print it out. So right here, I'm gonna print adding a new supplier, and this is going to happen 3 times because we have 3 suppliers. So we can safely print it because just gonna happen 3 times. There is one more thing we need to fix here, and that is getting the value from the cell. So if we actually execute this, now let's comment this out and actually print out what the supplier name here is. Let's actually get rid of this line. We don't need this, and run the program. You see here we have cell information. So it's not actually the value, the name of the supplier, but it's just the object cell, and the reason for that is because we are accessing a cell, but we're not actually extracting or getting the value out of it. And we can do that using this value attribute on that complete object. Again, something that you can look up in the documentation of this OpenPyXL module. So now let's run it again, and now we have the actual values of that cell, and this will take care of that small problem. And now we are ready to execute our program. And after the for loop, actually let's print out the dictionary because we want to see the results of the dictionary that we are building here. And I'm going to execute it now, and there you go. First of all, we have 3 times adding a new supplier because we have 3 suppliers, and this is the resulting dictionary. And it looks actually very good. First, we have company S because this was the first on the list, and we have number of products that were counted for that company. Then we have the second one with number of products, and the third one. So it looks like our program did exactly what we wanted. So that takes care of the first exercise. Now I want to note here one small thing, which is an alternative syntax for getting values from a dictionary, which is actually a more recommended way of doing it, which is instead of having these brackets here, to have a get method, to use a get function with the key name. So now you see the difference between those two. So this is setting the value of that key. Again, remember, key is this one here, and this is the value. So we are accessing the value of the dictionary using that key. And get function is actually another way of grabbing this value out of a dictionary using a key name. Again, if I execute this, I should see the same result. After the first exercise, basically we see from which company, from which supplier we have the most product or the highest number of products. Now, in the second exercise, we are going to calculate the total inventory value per supplier, meaning in our list for each product, we have number of units for the product and the price. So, for each supplier, we want to calculate how much is the total value of inventory of their products, of all their products. And again, as a result, we want to create a dictionary that generally tells us that value per company. Let's go ahead and do that. So this was calculation for number of products per supplier. And here we are going to give us some space and do calculation total value per supplier or total value of inventory per supplier. That's what we want to calculate. So just like we did before, we are going to create a new dictionary now and we are going to call it appropriately total value per supplier and start with an empty dictionary again. For starting in an easy way, let's consider the very first iteration for the first supplier. How are we going to calculate for the first supplier for the first product? So I'm going to take this new dictionary and with our familiar syntax, I'm going to do supplier name. So that's going to be our key and the value of the very first iteration for the first product is going to be inventory times price. So for the first product, we are going to calculate how much or how many of the product items we have and the number of prices that will give us the value of the total inventory for that one specific product. And that means we need those two values. Now we are just getting the value of the supplier. So we need inventory. I'm actually going to copy this. So we need cell for product row and column inventory is 1, column 2 and value. So whatever the product row is going to be, so for each product, basically for each row, we need always the second column. So all these values here and then we need price which going to be product list cell and we are looking for the third column for every row number 3 and value. So now we have inventory and price per product and the way to calculate value is inventory. That's the number of product items times price, very easy. That will give us the first value for the first supplier. Now again, the same way, if we are getting a new supplier, so in the next iteration, if it's a new supplier, then this line will get executed and everything is fine. However, if it's an existing supplier that we already have in the dictionary, then we have to add to that previous value instead of setting a new one. So we are going to do very similar logic as we did here. So we have the supplier name. We are checking is it a new supplier or an old one, an existing one. This time in our new dictionary, And if it is we are gonna grab that old or existing value, again using this get syntax here, existing value now is 100. We want to add to that 100, right? So we are gonna grab that value. This is going to be current total value. And then we are going to add to that current total value the inventory value for the current product and assign it back to our dictionary. Now our variable names a little bit long, so the code kind of looks a bit cluttered, but it's easy to read and descriptive. So you can also go for shorter variable names to have a cleaner code. Again, matter of taste. I usually name the variables something descriptive, something that basically really differentiates or says what the value is about, and that basically takes care of existing suppliers or the suppliers that we already have in the dictionary. Else, we do this, and this is complaining about too many blank lines. So let's fix that, and that's our logic. Again, to go through it once for new suppliers, again, this is going to happen 3 times because we have 3 suppliers. We are setting the total inventory price or inventory value for that specific product because remember, we are iterating through products, and then every time a new product iteration happens for the same supplier, we just add an inventory price or total value for that specific product for what we already have in the dictionary for that specific supplier. So now let's again price out our dictionary. Let's actually print both values. So the first dictionary is this one right here, supplier and number of products. Second one is going to be supplier and total value of all the products they have in the inventory with this execute. And there you go. We have both dictionaries printed here. And here you see for each company we have the value in price right here. The value for the total inventory of all the products they have on this list. And we see that value per suppliers, so that takes care of our second calculation. Now the third logic we are going to write is basically printing out all the products that have inventory less than 10, like this one here. For example, so the logic for that is actually going to be pretty easy. That we need as a result is again a dictionary. Let's call it products which have inventory under 10, like this, and the value in the dictionary should be the product number which we have in the first column and the inventory count. So let's get rid of this print statements and let's do calculation, or we can do logic products with inventory less than 10. So basically, as I said, for each product which has inventory under 10, we want to print out or we want to save in a dictionary the product number and the inventory count. So we have the inventory count already the value from the cell, but we don't have the product number. We are not accessing it. So let's actually do that product number, and we already know how this works. This is going to be the first column. This one here, and this gives us product number. And now in our dictionary product under 10, we want to add value like this product number, and it's going to be set to value of the inventory like this. However, we don't want it for every product. We want it only for products with inventory less than 10. And that's going to be an easy of conditional here. If inventory again, remember this logic, all this logic happens for each product row. So all these get executed for each of these rows. So generally we have inventory number on each iteration for each specific product. And that's why we can just say if inventory is less than 10, so if the value on that specific row is less than 10, we want to add that product, the current product that we are iterating on the list, and set the value of inventory as well. Again, we have some complaining here because of the lines, and this will be the logic. And a use case for this type of calculation would be if we find products that have inventory which are less than 10, means we need to reorder them because they are going to get out of stock soon. And now at the end, let's print the list of all the products that have inventory less than 10. So I'm going to execute it, and here we have the product number and inventory count. So we have 3 products basically which have inventory less than 10. And let's actually check that product number 25 right here has inventory of 7, and product number 30 inventory of 6, and the third one as well. And finally, as a last exercise, what we are going to do is we are going to actually add some value inside that spreadsheet. Till now, we have been reading the values and doing same calculations and just printing the result on the terminal. As the last exercise, we are actually going to create a new column here for every row, and we are going to calculate the total price of inventory, the number of unit times the price, and we are going to set the value for each product inventory multiplied by price. So how do we add a column, or how do we make changes to a file? It's actually pretty easy, the same way as we are grabbing the value from this file and reading the values, we can add values to it and add columns and rows, etc. So to add a fifth column, we are gonna do product list, sell product row. This is going to be the number of the row and the column number. So the same way we accessed the cells for all other values, we can access the cell on column 5 which has an empty value. So we are not actually creating a new column, we are just grabbing a value of a column 5 which happens to be empty, and we are overadding that value, and we could do the same actually for any other columns right here. We can override all these values if we wanted to. So that's basically what we are doing. So we are grabbing that cell and we can now save it into a variable. Let's actually call it inventory price. So now that cell is saved into that variable. So we can reference it and note here that I didn't add dot value at the end because if we want to update the cell, we need the whole cell object right so that we can actually set a value on that. So how do we set a value for that specific cell? So again, note that this is iteration. So for each product row, the value will be set. So how do we set the cell value? I'm just going to grab this variable here, inventory price, which is representing the cell in column 5 for each iteration, and right here at the end, because this is our last exercise. Let's write this is a logic or generally add value for total inventory price, and the way we set the value in a cell is dot value equals, and the calculation for that is actually very easy. We already did it here. Inventory times the price for that specific product, and that's it. So we are using that dot value here in order to set the value instead of grabbing the value, and that will actually update and add this calculation a result of the calculation on each line on this column. But note that this will only change the value in a temporary file, but it's not going to save anything right. So what we want to do at the end, if we want this change to persist to actually be saved, we want to explicitly save the file. So for example, if I actually did something here, added some value, I would need to save it here as well, right? So that's exactly what we need to do here, but programmatically using Python. So how do we save a file using Python? Again, this package or this module that we use here also gives us a function that we can use to save the file, and since we are going an operation on a file and not a sheet here, we are going to grab that variable in file, and here at the end we are going to call a save function on it, and this will save the file changes. However, we are not overriding the same file, the existing inventory file. We are creating a new one, and because of that we need to provide a name of the new file that is going to be created with the same function, and we are going to call that file, let's say, inventory with total value, and extension, the same extension as we have here. So this line will now save the changes and create a new file from the original one which has these values generated. So now that we are done with the fourth exercise, let's actually print out everything that we have done so far. I'm going to take all those values So this is going to be execution of all our logic printing these three dictionaries here and then updating the spreadsheet file and saving it into a new file. So with this, let's actually execute our program and see what happened. First of all, we have all those three dictionaries listed here or printed here with the values, and if we pull this aside here, you see a new file got generated with the name inventory with total value. And if we open this file, we should see that for each row a new column was generated and filled with values, which is calculated for each product's inventory and price. So that's our project. That's how you work with files in Python, specifically with spreadsheet files. And as I said at the beginning, this could be actually very useful automation logic when you're working at a company where there are lots of Excel files or spreadsheet files that employees have to work with and manually update stuff inside. So this is all about the automation in Python, which was based on inventory spreadsheet. And if you have any doubt or any question, you can ask me in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching.